Hello everyone, and welcome to a special upload here as a result of my activities covering the Great Santa Rosa Fire of October 8th and 9th, as well as the aftermath, the days after on that first week. You can imagine as probably having the most extensive on-the-ground collection of initial videos taken on that first morning of October 9th, as well as virtually every day after that, documenting the shelters, documenting the airport, the effort going on there. It was quite an extensive grouping of videos, and it generated a lot of controversy, and it generated a ton of questions. Was there a high energy pulse device used to start the fire? Was there a drones outfitted with lasers and EMP devices that can spark fires? And one of the most interesting ones I heard lately was one that I hadn't really thought about before, but one of my friends on one of the YouTube Hangouts mentioned to me that there is some back chatter that some of the cartels, some of the Mexican growers that dominated really the industry, the cannabis industry around here until medicinal marijuana was legalized last year, and then recreational marijuana is supposed to be legalized too. There was some thought that maybe some of these fires were being set by those individuals who weren't crazy about others cutting in on their growing. So it's a very interesting thing because a lot of the commercial growing areas were really wiped out in that fire. So it's an interesting theory too. Remember, most of this activity takes place up in the hills to the east of Santa Rosa. It's a very hilly area. It's very hard to access, so for a lot of people it makes a good growing area, and a lot of that is state land up there. So they don't really have too much to fear when they're working in that area doing their growing, but they have a lot to fear when the market looks like it's being potentially flooded by everyone from home growers to legal commercial growers. So something to think about. But there were a lot of questions that came up, and a lot of them were duplicated questions. And I don't want to hit every one of them, but some of the main ones were, do I think it was a directed pulse energy type of government clandestine operation that caused the fire? And my reaction is no, I don't think it was. I really think and it's now coming to light as measurements come in and things that up on Geyser Peak here within the counties we have on that morning, early morning of October 9th, 2017, 12 o'clock midnight, 1 a.m., 2 o'clock in the morning, the wind speeds were hurricane force winds here. Very rare for an area that doesn't really deal with too much wind here. And up on the peak, up on Geyser Peak, they measured wind speeds in excess of 105 miles an hour. These are catastrophic winds, and people that were evacuating during the event were talking about how they were being hit with stones, and flying stones were little pebbles and things were hitting them, and it was almost impossible to walk forward. And I'm afraid some of the elderly people, and most people that died were age 70 and above, up on the hills were not strong enough, I think, to safely evacuate from the area, and a lot of them perished due to lack of oxygen, and a lot of them, I fear, unable to cope with those high winds up at those places. The next question that people had was, why would they allow people to build on hills like that and overlooking the city? Well, remember, the fire spread all the way over to Flatland Coffee Park on the west side of town. It spared neither money nor poverty. It was an equal opportunity destructive fire. But true, it did begin up in the hills, at least on the other side of the hill over in Napa County. And you have to understand this way, these views, it's the same thing down in Hollywood when they have earthquakes and in the Hollywood canyons and all those places that people like to build and their homes are just kind of overhanging in air and things. It's all about the views, the views, the views, the views. And of course, now you see there's a price to be paid for that. The big concern now is, will insurance companies underwrite those homes anymore, number one? And number two, will the city allow and the county allow them to rebuild? And number three is, what's going to happen when the rains come, especially when they're forced to take out a lot of these foundations and what was compacted soil now becomes loose soil. You could really have some devastating landslides that tear away even more, destroy more homes over the winter. So there's a lot of things to be considered. Will they build up there again? Oh yes, because of the views and things like that. But they'll understand now that there's no way really to defense against that fire short of having a high pressure system set up on a generator that you hope will run and blast that 5,000 gallons of storage that you have and just start saturating your property, water bombing it from every direction for, you know, a half hour or 40 minutes while the fire is raging around. Plus, you're not going to be able to get back into that area for days or weeks. So it's something definitely to think about. So, you know, it's a big concern is building houses on hills, and they'll be doing it again for sure. Other questions that were asked were, what was some people asked, what was the first inkling that you had that this was no normal fire that was taking place? I guess when I journeyed a little northward from the Rancho, right through the heart of the city, and that's not that far from where we live here. And I got to a place called Cleveland Avenue, and that parallels Highway 101 running north and south. And I couldn't believe it when I walked up onto the overpass. The smoke was just choking, and I saw people up there, and I went up onto the overpass. And to my right, I just saw the right side of 101 just engulfed. As far as I could see forward, there were flames and fire. And I looked to my left, and there was restaurants on fire. There, where I had bought the gun, was burned down. There was a mobile home park afire. I could see through the rubble and the openings that there were hundreds of houses to the left that were on fire deep back in Coffee Park. That's when I knew this is not just a fire. This is a great fire. And that's, I guess it was about 9 o'clock when I stepped onto that overpass over 101 that I had my first inkling that this is really epic in its dimensions. Let's see. We talked about lots of people theorized it was a directed energy weapon that started the fire as a test. It's possible. Well, it's a terrible thought to think that something like that would be unleashed on people, because remember that fire consumed a lot of the movers and shakers first, and those very expensive homes and stuff. They paid a big price, and you would think that if there was going to be that kind of weapon used, it would be on, well, areas like this of lower middle income places with a lot of density. But so it doesn't, I really don't think that a directed energy weapon was used. How close was the Rancho to the fire zone, and were you scared? We're about a half a mile away from the, about a half a mile to a mile away to the evacuation area. I was keeping a real close eye on the fire because thankfully by the time I arrived and finished videoing in the morning about 11 a.m., most of the winds had already died down, and fires were no longer moving westward at a high rate of speed. So I kind of thought at that time that we were going to be okay. Plus we didn't get an official notification to evacuate. Our big concern came when a wind event was predicted for the following Wednesday night with 40 to 50 mile an hour winds overnight. The fires had only been about 20% contained at that time, and they could have easily roared into this community here. But thank goodness that those winds never came up. That front was a very weak one that came through. and we were spared. But we were evacuated. Well, not evacuated, but we had all of our stuff packed and ready to go. Will you follow the cleanup efforts? A lot of people have asked that. I will. They're having meetings and trying to discuss who's going to who's going to do the cleanup, who's going to opt into the cleanup process. How do you not opt in? Can you use your own contractor? There's a senior citizen housing complex here that the day after the fires, they were in there, caught already taking debris and carting it away in trucks and stuff. And this was before the rescue teams had even had a chance to get in there and see if any bodies were in that char and stuff. So they've tried to be very careful about the way that they're doing things. So we want to get the legalities done, and then of course we'll follow. There's areas I haven't even nobody's been able to go into yet, because there's still lots of down power lines and telephone lines and cable lines for miles. And up in the hills is so bad, up on some of those roads, Sky Farm and places like that, that there's still very limited access and no access to those areas. And we still have National Guard here in a big presence. So then this last question was just a few people asked us, how do you call it the Great Santa Rosa Fire? How big was the fire in a historical sense? Well, right now, the most expensive fire in California history before this one was the Oakland Hills fire, and that people died down there. And that's the one where people were trying to evacuate from the hills coming down, and the fire engines were coming up, and all of a sudden it was gridlock and people got trapped in the fire. It was an awful situation. That was $2 billion. This is already $3.5 billion. This is almost twice as big financial wise as the Oakland Hills fire. There's 43 people dead, which makes it the deadliest. There were 6,000 structures destroyed, which makes it the greatest. And there were 80,000 people under evacuation at the peaks. Over 128 square miles were burned here. And there were 6,000 firefighters engaged from around the world. And at one time, on the 11th and 12th of October, there were half of the fire equipment, half of the fire trucks in the state of California was centered here around Sonoma County, with planes and trucks, and it's an amazing effort. We now have over 100 PG&E trucks here working to try to restore service and all that. That, my friends, qualifies as a mega disaster, and certainly the worst wildfire in California history, which is no stranger to wildfires. Hey, thanks for being along today. There's always more questions coming in. I'm sure there'll be more by the time I get to the monthly mail call beginning November 1st. But I want to thank you so much today for being along. Thumbs up are appreciated. And if you haven't seen it, go back and check out the fire videos. And if you don't want to invest the hours to watch all the ground footage, go watch the Great Santa Rosa Fire, a cinematic experience. It is the gateway video for non-subscribers, and you might get a real sense of the calamity that unfolded here in our town of Santa Rosa. Thanks so much, everyone.